I'm Amanda.
And I'm Mel.
And this is the Road Back Home podcast,
where we share real conversations about midlife, sobriety, and sisterhood.
Hey, Mel.
Hi, Amanda.
How's it going? Welcome back.
Yes, I'm excited to be back. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great now. And welcome back to our lovely listener there. I hope your ears are good today.
Clean that wax out.
And brace yourself, because we're talking about a topic that I know a lot of people, there's a lot of talk about it, and hopefully we can bring something new to it, and something personal to it. But we're talking about people pleasing today. And I had also thought as an episode title, people pleasing and the C word. What do you think that C word might be?
Well, I'm not going to guess because we all know what I'll guess.
People pleasing and the C word. So basically, the C word being control.
Yeah.
People pleasing as a form of control, both as a reaction to control and also as a form of control. But anyway, we'll get into that in a minute. I'm going to give everybody's brain a little bit of a roadmap for where we're going. We'll kind of like talk about our experiences with people pleasing and our understandings of it, and then maybe even a bit of a wider understanding, let's say, from different schools of thought on people pleasing in the context of control, and what can also, like, basically wherever there is control, there is fear. So underneath that control is also fear, and so how this really is an acting out of fear and the role of power, how this plays. We'll give examples. I also want to give ideas of how people pleasing sometimes can show up in unexpected ways, because I think sometimes with many topics that are discussed a lot and given a lot of airtime, they tend to end up being pigeonholed into a certain set of behaviors, let's say. And so there is obvious people pleasing, and then there are other forms of it that aren't so obvious. And I, as somebody who never identified as a people pleaser and then discovered I would have been, it showed up in unexpected ways with me. And then also, of course, we'll talk about breaking free and reclaiming your power instead of having to rely on control. And of course, that will lead us into things like boundaries, authenticity, and we hope to give our listeners a lot of food for thought here in terms of relating it to their own life.
That sounds like such a well-rounded conversation to have. We're not just focusing on one element, but rather kind of, like you said, bringing in lots of schools for thought, because when we had decided to do a podcast about people pleasing, and for me it felt like it would be very straightforward until I started kind of really questioning my own what would you even call it? Is it a trait, Amanda? What would you call it?
A tendency?
A tendency, yeah. So my own tendency to people please. When I started questioning it, so much more came up than I was anticipating.
Okay.
Shall we dive right in?
Go first.
Yeah.
Spill the beans.
Yeah. So, what came up for me was, and I suppose it's different for each case. Like how much of my people pleasing, for instance, comes from a genuine empathy for other people, because, as I tend to absorb a lot of feelings that other people have around situations that require empathy. So I started questioning how much of it is that, and how much of it is the need to control because of fear, because of the fear of so many different things, I use the word adaptable a lot of the time when I'm talking about myself, that I can be adaptable. I can walk into a situation and adapt to the environment and be whatever version of Mel is needed there at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
which, I never really considered people pleasing, but that's pretty much what it is. It's coming in and not asking myself what I need in this situation. And sometimes the answer is not to be here at all.
Yeah.
Um, but rather, kind of assessing the room, who needs what from me? And you think it's in order to make them comfortable, but it's actually in order to make yourself comfortable and safe,
Mhm.
isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yes, absolutely.
And
It's self-preservation.
yeah, and then you come out exhausted and you nearly reward yourself for the exhaustion because, especially as women, and we will say this often and say it loud for the people down the back, as women in society, we only consider ourselves worthy when we're exhausted and when we've given every article of clothing from our body, never mind the shirt off your back. Only when we're naked and exhausted can we then accept our award for being worthy.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so, I used to equate that exhaustion with a sense of accomplishment,
Yeah.
and it's bloody dangerous because at the end of the day, you've stripped yourself of everything you need, um, and it's not healthy.
Yeah. I think it is impressed upon people, let's say, who might identify as people pleasers, that this is a form of virtue,
Right.
you know? Because there is a lot of social validation when being, let's say, accommodating to that degree. You know, you're you're not really putting up much of a barrier for people, and so it's almost like it's easy to be around you, and so you become easy. But eventually, what ends up happening is you become easy, yeah, but also resentful. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
eventually, there is a cost because there is a limit. Um, and yes, arriving at, and also we have to kind of think about our particular situation as having, and you particularly having, not only a background, but like an arts degree in performance,
Right. Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and that kind of like turning on the social face, the social mask that is another form of self-preservation in a way. But isn't it funny how the lengths and the hoops that we jump through to protect this self-preservation and to express, I suppose, our self-preservation instinct instead of just being like, no. Like it could be such a shorter way around it. Like we could meet that need an awful lot more head on by like that, not being so accommodating or not being so available.
Yeah.
Um, but then, of course, that may cause problems in terms of like, as you said, it might not feel safe because the environment does have so much to do with it in terms of like, I think a lot of our people pleasing as well is a kind of a result of thinking that and unconsciously it being imprinted upon us that we are responsible for other people's feelings and
Yeah.
we're responsible for other people's welfare. We're responsible for other people's experiences. And as a therapist, let's say I'm a qualified therapist and I don't practice therapy, but I did practice therapy. And I know that, and even beyond being a therapist, just say, being a coach, being a group facilitator, delivering workshops, things like that, one of the things that you learn along the way is that it doesn't work when you try and control other people's experiences of the whatever the offering is.
Mm.
And there's so much letting go that has to happen to let people have their own experiences, even if that experience is something that gives you anxiety,
Right. Yeah.
you know? Um, we've said this about the performance, and I remember somebody, I can't remember who it was, I was watching it recently. I think it was a comedian or maybe a performer, and he said exactly what I've heard you say as well, is that like you could be entertaining a room of 10, like 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
99 of them are laughing.
Yeah.
There's that one person
Yeah.
sitting there with their arms folded, not having a good time, and very expressively not
Yeah.
having a good time. And that one person will somehow catch your eye and derail your confidence or and I don't mean yours and you, but this is a phenomenon that I hear a lot of people talking about, where it's like that one disagreeable or perceived disagreeable person
Yeah.
will kind of hijack our
Oh,
attention.
it has happened to me years and years ago, as you remember, when I was doing stand-up comedy back in the good old days in Dublin.
Mm,
And I remember focusing in on this one person who just seemed miserable throughout the whole routine. And when I got off stage, I remember rather than focusing on the people who had had a great time, who were coming up and complimenting the routine, I sat with the miserable person, basically asking, like, how could I adjust my routine so that you could also laugh?
I know.
And I
I know.
laugh to myself now, thinking of, that wasted moment and, the sliding door effect of maybe how life would have gone
Mm,
differently had I focused on the people in the room
mm,
who were enjoying it. Because ultimately, when somebody is not responding in the way that you would like them to respond, like you just said, you can't control, them to respond in a different way. And it's not necessarily your fault that they are feeling the way they're feeling.
yeah.
It's almost it's preposterous for us to assume that, we have the power to change how somebody is feeling as well. There's that element of it too.
Do you know, I'm remembering one specific example, and we were at one of, I was at one of Dad's shows. And just for context, for anybody who's not aware as they're listening, our father was a comedian. He's since passed on. He was a comedian in Ireland. Brendan Grace, if you were Irish, you most likely have heard of Brendan Grace. He was an entertainer, but mostly known as a comedian. And so I remember specifically being at one of his shows. Now, this wasn't too long ago, so I
Mm.
would have already started, let's say I would have had some of my training and I would have been diving into this kind of a thing. So, in the past, it would have given me anxiety to witness this. But I remember sitting in the audience and my attention kept going towards this one man who was sitting back in the chair, legs crossed, arms crossed, and there was an air of defiance about him as if to say, go on, make me laugh. That's not funny. You're not funny. And I remember thinking to myself, that man came in like that.
Yeah.
He arrived like that. He arrived with that defiance, as in, like, he made up his mind maybe a half an hour ago and 2 hours ago, 20 years ago, that Brendan Grace wasn't funny.
Yeah.
And he wasn't about to be proven wrong. And God knows, maybe he was dragged along to the show and he was only going to keep herself happy. You know, this kind of a thing, and
Yeah.
acting like as if he'd no choice but to be there. And I remember sitting there, and at the time, I just got this lovely feeling of release in my body because I thought to myself, you think you're proving a point here, but like the comedian's job is not to make you laugh. It's actually a transaction. It's
Hmm.
not a passive thing. You don't go to a show and sit there like a lump of spuds and then just be made to laugh. Like, the laugh is an offering, it's an exchange, and it is an energetic exchange that a performer goes up on stage, does their thing, that's their job. They do
Hmm.
their thing and they prepare and whatever it is. And the audience's job is to what? Be an audience. It's not
Hmm.
just to be an unsuspecting person who didn't anticipate having to do anything in the moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that concept that it's a transaction. He took it on as a challenge. It was a challenge for him.
Oh yeah, and then
Yeah.
delighted with himself going out the door saying, "See, I didn't laugh all night. Brendan Grace isn't funny." You know, I said like, "Oh great, so you get to go home and be right, but you denied yourself the experience that so many people around you were having, where they literally just took their, as we say,
Mhm.
emotional stress, like daily bra off. You know,
Yeah.
just that 90 minutes of suspending reality long enough to get some endorphins flowing."
Yeah.
And you had a choice. You could have done that. You could have participated, but you did not participate.
And I love dad. Dad was never phased by that.
People would come up after and say, Brendan O'Carroll is funnier. Dad would say, but sure, I'm just full of worms, or he's full of
Yeah.
worms, or something like that. Yeah, he didn't get it. He didn't argue, in other words. He didn't argue.
He did not take it on as a stress.
Yeah.
He was so capable of letting comments like that just,
Mm.
drip off him like, what did they say? Water off a duck's back.
Mm.
Yeah. But come here, tell me, like, so when we talk about people pleasing, we talk about environments and, going into a room and,
Mm.
like I had said earlier, assessing a situation and seeing where, I can be most helpful here in order to make everyone's evening, enjoyable. Um, for you, right? When I've had experiences with you in a space where I feel that you you didn't feel you had to do that. Where you brought whatever you were feeling with you into a space.
Mm.
Like it wasn't necessarily a people pleaser situation in that regard. At what point do you feel what is your earliest memory of being a people pleaser? And at what point did you feel, the courage to just bring whatever you were feeling into a space, regardless of a fear?
Okay. So I will give you, instead of my earliest memory of people pleasing, I will give you my earliest memory of people displeasing. Right? My
Yeah.
earliest memory of failing to please was I was 4 years of age and we were in Disneyland. And
Mm,
um, once again, God bless his memory and his soul, and we love him very much. But my dad, our dad, wanted me to go
mm,
on one of the things with him in Disneyland, whatever it was, whatever, thing. I said
yeah.
no, no, don't want to. And dad fell out with me and he sulked. Right. Now, that was my earliest memory of kind of like realizing that, you know, uh, saying no, there's a cost to that. Now,
Yeah.
instead of me kind of like trying to make up for that, I then, not at four, but I think that how people pleasing lodged in me was more a
Mhm.
case of resentment. I would resent the expectation because it was almost like the rule is that, and it's presented as if it is a choice. But then it
Mm,
actually isn't a choice. Like, I'll give you a better example of this was that when I did the premarital inquiry, and for anybody who doesn't remember or know that, in Ireland, when you get married through the Catholic Church, you have to do what is called a premarital inquiry ahead of time. And that is where you sit with a priest and the priest reads you out what are posed to you as questions. And those questions are things like, do you promise or vow or whatever the language is to raise your children in the Catholic faith? Right?
mm,
And you're supposed to say yes. That's what you're supposed to say. But of course, I was like, hold on for a second, hold on. Let's back it up a little bit. First of all, I don't know if I'm going to have children. And second of
yeah.
all, probably not. I don't know. I don't know and I remember the like record scratch that I heard in my head when the priest was kind of like he was ready to tick the box and then looked up at me and was like, "Well, like there isn't a box for that."
Yeah.
Do you know that
Yeah.
that the like you're supposed to say yes? And I was like, "Well, then it's not a question. It's a,
Yeah.
if that's the case, it's a rule. So stop reading these to me, stop posing or presenting these statements to me as if they're questions. They're rules. Just read them out to me and let me show me where to sign and I'll be off. So that was my kind of like, that's how I'm quite confrontational in that regard. And where that confrontation is coming from is a kind of resentment because I have now come up against the thing that says you're not allowed we only want you on our team if you conform to our rules. And those rules very often were at odds with my value system. And I would value being authentic and
Mm,
autonomous more than I would value belonging to a structure that, I really am only just going through the motions because I don't know that there are other ways to do it. That kind of way. So it was like,
mm.
um,
Yep.
Yeah, whereas I know that other people have gone through that premarital inquiry and just been like, yep, 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 and I'm kind of like, well, what would you prefer on your team? Would you prefer like an independent thinker or a liar?
Well, where the church is concerned, absolutely probably the latter.
Well,
Because,
there
you
you
know,
go. And
yeah,
yeah.
you go back to what you said in the beginning, the C word. If you want to talk about control, I mean, church, particularly in Ireland or just Catholic across the board, has been absolutely one of the most controlling structures that we've ever
Mm,
been involved in or witnessed. So that
yeah.
doesn't come to me as a surprise at all. But that's really interesting about, the resentment, of course, would be there as a result of, not being allowed to have an opinion.
Yeah. And beneath that resentment, so when I unpack all of, let's say, the dynamic of how it showed up for me, underneath that resentment essentially is shame because it's like your way is wrong. The way you go about life is wrong. Like there is a way and we expect that way. And when that way is not, when you don't comply with that way, well, then you are wrong. And
Yeah,
that then brings up feelings of shame at the very most fundamental level. It's isolating. It's abandoned. It's like you are wrong and therefore must be made right. In fact, one of the things that I found out when I was another branch that I studied was spirituality, and I was actually amazed to find out that in the Bible, I don't know if it's the Bible, but let's just say in text, because Christianity wasn't written in English, put it that way,
mm,
right? And so what we know as sin and penance, they are words that are used today, but the direct translation of the original words used was actually wound and healing, you
interesting.
know? Yeah. So, yeah, anyway, I've kind of gone off on a tangent there, but all of that being warped, like it all being weaponized and all of the language and the way that this is supposed to manifest and be taught in life and everything was all weaponized to get us to conform to power structures that were dominant in their nature. It was like you have to be stripped of power in order for us to have it.
And,
So I
and
see
and
people pleasing fundamentally as a power struggle.
and the questions that are offered are basically the wolves dressed in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, they're not even questions. Like they're
Yeah.
rules. You're reading me rules and trying to pawn them off on me as questions. And if I don't have autonomy in how I'm going to answer those questions, well, then the answer is no, and then that means that I can't proceed.
Mm,
And then I resent that. I resent that the only way I can proceed is by dropping what's important to me and performing in a way that is convenient for you,
yeah.
you know?
Wow, imagine your earliest memory of that being at 4. And they say that those kinds of memories, and core memories, um, you know, they stand out. And
Yeah.
so from there, like, where would that have developed for you from there?
Well, from there, I mean, I guess it's a hard one for me to, because as you said, I never presented as a people pleaser. I never presented as a pleaser. I presented more as a kind of an antagonist.
Mm,
I was in there kind of ripping shit up and being rebellious. And now, in saying that, I was also deeply insecure.
right.
So I was pleasing. I was very much pleasing societal expectations. I was pleasing in terms of peer pressure. I was out trying to gain approval in other ways,
Yes.
you know, not necessarily through figures of authority, but
Mm,
through more kind of sideways ways. I was trying to gain approval, and a sense of belonging in my own ways. So I know that I was very much a people, or not a people pleaser, but a pleaser when it came to men, for example, male
hmm
attention. I was over accommodating in there. I was also over accommodating in the what's her name? Chapel Roan has a song now at the moment called Casual, And she says, I try to be the chill girl
Mm.
who, what is it? Who, something and gives you space. Basically, I try and not lose you by pretending to be something I'm not, you know? So
And then
and
you have to sit in that fear afterwards when you know damn well that you are not that. When you come home and take off the mask and take off the costume, and you sit and you stew in that kind of, that fearful place of, I wonder, can I get another day out of this? It's
yeah,
it's a lot of work to pretend that you're something you're not.
yeah. This is the lyric. I try to be the chill girl that holds her tongue and gives you space. And then she says, I try to be the chill girl, but honestly, I'm not.
Yeah,
So that's how it would have been for me. I was out there trying to be cool, just trying to
yeah.
be like accepted, I guess. But in the meantime, to the teachers, I was given the fingers, I was given cheek. I was like, well, tell me, man, I don't give a shit. Like I was like that. I wasn't trying to be good. I was trying to be cool. I
But
was
it's
trying to be
funny.
accepted.
Yeah, but it's funny because you're like, that was a direct route to acceptance, was your rebellion against authority, because that was seen as cool to your peers.
Yes.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So in
Mhm.
in doing that, that was another way for you to gain authority in your group. Look how mad I can be with, because other
Mhm.
kids,
Mhm.
you can't believe when a kid is cheeky enough to, throw the finger up at a teacher or something like that, and you absolutely end up in the throne of your friend group, and it's usually the wrong friend group, but it takes years for you to
Mhm.
figure that out too.
Mhm.
And I mean, you generalized obviously, but so it's such a dangerous dynamic that I think some people don't ever come to realize, um, has followed them through their adult life in many ways too. Because
Mhm.
until we acknowledge a behavior, we can't even attempt to change it. But yeah, Amanda, that is, I mean, you're describing what I remember, in our
Mhm.
childhood.
Mhm.
And then I think back to, when do I remember becoming a people pleaser? And there's a couple of scenarios, and this goes back to what I opened with, how much of my people pleasing is a genuine empathy and a will and desire to, to help people, or how much of it is driven by a fear of rejection, and a fear of disappointing people, and a fear of not being considered as fun. There's so many things I could go into. Like, I
Mhm.
remember when my brothers, who are your brothers too, by the way, we we always have this.
What?
We
I
al-
have brothers?
we always have this thing, me and Amanda, where when we're talking to each other, I'll say, and then my mom said, and Amanda will say, and is she my mom too? So we're very territorial with our language around our family, aren't we? But when the boys, as in Brad and Bran, were little, I remember it was my favorite thing to do was to be their other mammy.
Mm.
And and when I have those memories, that kind of people pleasing doesn't come with any negative memory. I don't remember ever going to bed at night and saying, "Oh, Jesus, making that picnic for the boys and bringing them up to the playhouse and pushing them on the swings. When will it ever end?" You know, I don't I don't have a negative memory associated with that. I couldn't wait for the next day to do it again. Whereas, people pleasing parents, like, so I remember, I'm back to, you saying that, you were quite rebellious as a tween slash teenager. And, it caused a lot of stress for our parents. And I know you don't mind me saying that because,
Mhm.
it is what it is. And
Mm.
I remember witnessing their stress. And by the way, their stress that they didn't handle well themselves,
Mhm.
because they only had a certain amount of tools, to deal with their stress. And they had outside stressors that we weren't aware of as kids that came into the picture, right? So Dad especially, and again, we never like, talking ill of our parents, whether they're living or not. But it's fair to say that, as a parent, dad was just quick to anger. There was
Hmm.
kind of no in between. And especially if you displayed anything other than immense gratitude. Every other emotion,
Mm.
wasn't even questioned. It was just downright refused. But I remember, when they were stressed over your behavior, I
Mm.
remember taking on the role of the goody two shoes. I
Mm.
will do everything in my power to never give my parents a need or a reason to be stressed. I know that now as overcompensation. I wouldn't have known that at the time. I will
Mm.
overcompensate for the fact that, and it was almost giving you, and this is my empathetic people pleasing, also giving you that little bit of space, to continue whatever you needed to do. I won't add to their stress.
Mm.
So, therefore, what are the things that I can do to not add to their stress? Well, I can make sure that I'm doing everything and anything that's even not asked of me. So, I will do housework and I will, tell them only happy stories, and I won't tell them, anything that I'm feeling that is anything other than happy, or something that might gain me even a little bit of praise. And funny, I didn't necessarily like standing out as the good child, because then that had a negative impact on our relationship, you and me,
Yeah.
because that
Mm.
wasn't good for you. So, I think I definitely took on that role of people pleasing to avoid the consequences that were being dished out to you, but
Mm.
also to avoid mom and dad having to be stressed about anything else. And maybe that's why I took the boys a lot of the time as well. You know, I just
Mm.
decided I will be a mammy at 9 years of age. And and but at the end of the day, what memory I do have of doing that is fear, you know,
Yes.
just a fear of I used to think that you were, I knew you were rebellious, but I used to think, God, she's so brave to be able to deal with those consequences. And I was not made of that same material.
Mm.
I was afraid of my own feckin' shadow. Um, so yeah, and people pleasing then, you don't know that it's building you at the time, but it follows you then for the rest of your life until you figure out ways to have healthy boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember hearing there's a coach out there, her name is Brooke Castillo, and without getting into, like, she's kind of controversial, but anyway, without going down that path, one of the things that she said one time, and I was like, oh my God, she said people pleasers are liars. Now, she was deliberately being antagonistic with that.
Right.
But what she was kind of saying, and it's a good way of kind of like um shocking you out of a pattern that ultimately isn't serving you, because pleasing, being accommodating is so socially validated, and especially in the Ireland we came from, when you talk about our parents and every one of our, like, we're Gen X, and our parents, their generation, grew up in the kind of Ireland where, you know, children should be seen and not heard,
Yeah.
and children were objects nearly, they were possessions, and there really was no like, I remember so many of my reactions to kids having, parents who would consult with their kids, like when we moved to America,
Yes.
and me waitressing. And I remember specifically being at one table and I was waiting on the parents and the parent, to make the order. And the parents were like, I'll have this and I'll have this. And then they turned to little, Johnny, and we're like, and what will you have, John? And he's probably 6 and he's like, ah. And then they spend all of this time, which in my 19-year-old mind is my time, my precious time, trying to coax Johnny into making his own decision. And I was literally on the inside becoming homicidal. And I remember the severity of my reaction in that moment. And of course, unpacking it many years later was
Yeah.
almost like I had this attitude towards kids that was the same. It was like you order for them. He'll have sausage and chips, and Johnny might be like, I don't want that. You'll have sausage and chips and you'll like them, and that was it. It was end of conversation.
That's all
And
you're
so
getting.
that's it.
That's
And
all
it was,
you get served. Yeah.
yeah, and it was always to kind of like to accommodate the adults whose time was more precious and time was more valuable and blah, 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 blah. And the kids then we were just kind of like told what we were eating, told how we were dressing, told how to feel, blah, 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 blah. And that's nobody's fault, let's say, except the Catholic Church. But anyway, it's not our parents' fault. It's not that generation's fault. But that
Right.
generation grew up in an atrocious
Oh,
Ireland that
yeah.
had an awful attitude. And so there were no advocacy. There was no voice to kind of say that these children are equals. Like they're human, they're little human beings of the future who
Yeah.
are allowed to have their own will and autonomy and not have to fight for it
Mm-hmm.
or people please their way around earning it. I'm allowed get my way, but only after I have completely expended myself,
Yeah.
um, proving that I am worthy of it.
Yeah.
So let's just say if that was what it boiled down to, that's the two expressions we had. I took it and you earned it.
Yes.
I took it and I was like, fuck you, this is mine. And then, I'll deal with the consequences later. Whereas you waited until the parents or the adult or whatever authority figures said, no, now, now you can have like good girl, Mel, like kind of a thing. Like you're allowed because it wasn't scary to you. You felt like safe finally getting what you wanted and needed because you had done so much to earn it.
Right. Yeah.
I took it
Mountain
up front
climb. Yeah. Yeah.
and paid those consequences. So the consequences were like the cost was either coming ahead of time or afterwards. I was in debt. You were in credit,
Yeah.
do you know? And like you said, then that does then damage the dynamic between me and you as kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're resenting me for causing so much disharmony in the house that threatens your safety. And then I'm resenting you for compensating and therefore validating the perception of me as a difficult one. And
Yeah.
it puts us at odds with each other.
Yes. And it did,
Mm, it did, of course.
you
And you
know.
see that dynamic, by the way, in so many families. And even in work spaces, and all of that things. You'll see it everywhere. So yeah, what Brooke was saying is that like people pleasers are liars, and in that she was kind of saying that ultimately people pleasing is a form of dishonesty because it involves hiding our true thoughts, our true feelings, our true needs, or we're doing something that we, oh, like honestly, fundamentally don't want to do, but we can't admit that to ourselves or to others because we're afraid of what that will mean about us, which kind of brings us down to this idea of power. I am who you say I am.
Yeah.
I am whatever you think of me becomes my identity. And now I have to control that. It's like, I remember having this vision one time of me, um, so let's say you're the author of your own story. I was not authoring my own story. Do you know what I was doing? I was policing everybody else's stories. What are you writing about me over there? What are you writing about me? What are
Yeah.
you saying about me? And trying to wrestle the pen out of their hands or perform like some performing monkey, like so that to get you to write a better role for me, because the role you're writing for me in the story of your life sucks.
Yeah.
And
Oh
I'd
yeah.
like a better role, please.
Yeah. And then you perform, you audition for the part.
Yeah. And you still get a shitty role, and you're like, hey, instead of just letting, there's a actually, I don't know, have I ever asked you this? Apparently, this is a theatre concept called the fetch.
The
And
fetch.
the fetch or a fetch. And apparently, now I could be completely wrong, and I probably am, but a fetch is um, it's a phrase or it's a term for a member of not the cast, but let's say the story being told, the protagonist's memory or perception of a character who is not actually in the play, almost like an apparition becomes
Hmm.
part of the play through just through being related to by a protagonist. So the fetch then becomes this kind of like, it's not the real person, it's this person's idea of the person.
Hmm. That's
You ever heard of that?
interesting. I
Yeah.
haven't. No, I haven't come
So
across
some,
it.
and I often say to my, because I've said it to myself, it's kind of how I found peace, in other words, is like, I wonder how many fetches are out there of me. And I just wish them all, I send them all love because I'm like, I know that there's a fetch over in, this one story who's just going through hell, who's the villain,
Yeah.
who's an absolute asshole.
Yeah, and that's the hardest because you can't people please with an enemy. There's no ability to control whatever chance there is of controlling um the narrative of somebody who you're on good terms with. And these are usually not people you're really on good terms with. Like there is no hope for
Oh
somebody
yeah.
who has announced you as an enemy
Yeah.
to rewrite that part, you know?
Like I was only sitting this morning, like indulging a little story in my head about people that I have a resentment towards, and so in my little world at the moment, they're cast as, like if this was a pantomime, they'd be booed when they come on stage.
Yeah.
Do you know? And that's me. That's me writing that because they haven't lived up to my expectations. They're not pleasing me. Do you
Yeah.
know? They're not acting according to my script of how I believe they should be showing up in life. And therefore, I then cast them as the villains who get booed on the stage of my life, you know?
Yeah.
And there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. What are ways to start moving away from people pleasing?
Okay.
How do you how do we become comfortable with that?
Okay. Um, so before we say that, I have to also come back to another story because I think these may be useful for, because you said there about this is a way to control your environment. It's like I can only be peaceful if the environment is a certain way.
Yeah.
I'm going to totally out you now, but we've all done this in some form. I don't know. Do you remember one time years ago, you
Yeah.
went to a meditation class and somebody at the meditation class had a cough? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you sent me a message afterwards and you were like, I went to this meditation class and it was fucking ruined with this person who had a cough. You were disgusted. Like you were absolutely disgusted, like wasted time, blah, blah, blah. And I remember us laughing about it afterwards because it was almost like meditation is something that we do not in perfect circumstances.
Hmm.
We have to learn how to find our own equilibrium, even when the world has an annoying cough.
Right.
When the world is annoying us with its, it's not, these are not the conditions in which I can have peace. And then we abandon the post of having inner peace, trying to fix the conditions.
Yeah.
You know, I just thought that was, I remember us having a good laugh about that, where it was like the whole point of meditation is that you could sit in a room and
Yeah.
not be,
Well,
and not be
exactly.
distracted.
The point of it being that like the best meditators are the ones who do it with the environmental noises in the background because they're
Mm.
tuning them out. I was horrified that this person thought so much of themselves that they thought that we could all just be in this space and spend our money in a meditation class only to listen to them bark through the 45 minutes. I remember leaving resentful.
Yes. And you see that other thing, like this person allowing themselves to be there, even though, so a people pleaser would just be like, oh, I'll just leave.
Yes.
I'm obviously annoying, this is obviously very annoying for all people. So I'll leave. And now I don't get my meditation class, but oh well.
Listen, it's like the families at mass, right? The families at mass. You have some families who leave the second their child starts speaking loudly. And then you have the families who allow their children to be children and laugh and cry and scream and roar and run up and down the aisles. And like there's such a stigma about it though, because they are judged. There's a huge
Mm,
judgment that we haven't even spoken about when it comes to, are
true.
you people pleasing or are you not? And that tells you a lot about a person. That tells you that somebody gives a shit or doesn't give a shit about other people
Mm,
judging them.
mm,
You've got the parents who whip the child out at the first signs of a cry, and then you've got, the parents who are like, "Meh, well, this is part of life, so everyone else is just going to have to deal with it because I'm not missing mass just because my child is crying."
mm. Yeah, there's extremes. Funny enough, recently I was with a friend and her 2-year-old. It was almost like it was a full circle moment for me. Like her 2-year-old, she said to her 2-year-old, let's say the 2-year-old's name was Neve, I don't know, but she was like, Neve, say hello to Amanda. And the 2-year-old was like, no, I don't want to. And both me and my friend, who both of us Gen Xers, we both at the same time said, that's okay, maybe later.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. I thought that you were going to say, "That's not very nice. No lollipop for you."
But that because that's what and the two of us are therapists, let's say. So
Oh,
we've already unpacked the fact that that was actually not helpful to us as kids because what would happen then is, and I could feel the old conditioning in me, like wanting to do the whole, oh now I'm sad.
oh
Do you
my.
know, like wanting to manipulate the child against her, like out of her consent, like, out of her own will, out of her own autonomy for her to please me with the hello I looked for and
Amanda,
not go on.
no, sorry, I thought that you were coming to an end there with that sentence. I misjudged.
Fortunately not.
We'll have to get better with that.
I just had coffee, so
An
maybe no
espresso.
end.
An espresso. Um, let's talk then about the hugs, the forced
Hmm.
hugs,
Yes.
particularly particularly with like, and I don't necessarily want to get sexist about it, but young girls being forced to hug older men.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like I mean, I can't stop thinking about the amount of times that as a young girl I felt uncomfortable with this stranger who I was going to give him a hug. He's after giving you a pound. Give him a
Yeah.
hug. Give him a hug and give him a big kiss. Like,
Yeah. Ugh.
and everything in your body was screaming, this is really uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
But
So you can
again, it wasn't done in malice.
no, it was like almost polite or rude. You didn't want to seem to be rude, you know?
Yeah.
But what we know now is that it's much more important to allow for a child, of 2 years, their developmental stage at 2 is learning that it is safe for them to have their own autonomy,
Yeah.
learning that it is safe for them to go their own way, that the world isn't going to punish them for not wanting to do something in that moment that
Mm.
is ultimately transactional. Like, I'm not going to die if you don't say hello to me. So, but it was just so interesting how both of us in that moment responded with, that's okay, maybe later.
Oh, I love it. I love that.
Yeah. And it was
Mm.
like a full circle moment for my 4-year-old who was like, or my inner toddler who was like, wouldn't that have been nice if it was like, oh, that's okay that you don't want to do the thing. I'm not going to force you to, and I'm not going to make you feel bad that I'm not going to make you feel bad for having your own ideas about what you would like to do with yourself.
Yeah, and another aspect as well, Amanda, as for parents, right? And I've done this myself, and I'm much, much more aware of it now. But you know, especially parents of younger kids, toddlers, maybe up through even on kids under 10, let's say even, because up until then, you can very much control a child. After that, it gets much harder. And if you're aware enough to know that we really shouldn't be controlling, but rather, guiding them more so than controlling them, what happens a lot of the times as well, and back to parents saying, give them a hug, give them a kiss, say thank you, say this, do that, like
Hmm.
constantly telling a child how they should respond rather than allowing them to respond. And maybe it's not the response that makes you happy, but just allowing it to be theirs. What that's doing is it is directly appeasing the parent's people pleasing tendency,
Hmm.
right? Because if the child doesn't align with how the parent wants them to respond, the parent is the one who's then responsible, because then that other person leaves and judges their parenting. Jesus,
Hmm.
did you notice that Johnny didn't even say thanks? Jesus,
Hmm.
I would have made him say thanks. And that might not be what's happening at all. But in the
Mm.
people pleaser brain, in order to control that from not happening, we will make sure that our child says these things, does these things. How liberating it would be for both child and parent for the child to just react without us having to make an excuse for them.
Mm.
Oh, he's just not feeling good today. That's why he didn't say thanks. Normally, he's very grateful. It's because of how we're being judged as parents.
Yeah.
And there's something very liberating about getting to the point where if somebody expects something of your child and they don't deliver, and you hold your breath and say nothing and just let it be, I'll tell you,
Mm.
it is definitely a step in the direction of, ending the cycle of people pleasing tendency.
Yeah, you can see how it takes root, let's say, but and then the other thing as well is like how nice would it be to live in a world where everybody kind of accepts that, to the majority degree, is that like I am responsible for my emotional reaction to the world, not everybody else. Like I'm not going to hold people hostage to my emotional well-being. Like if something displeasing happens, I can handle that. I don't need for the world to change so that I don't have to experience something other than okayness, you know? And one of the things that you mentioned there about was I think as well the idea of people pleasing is like the idea of trying to keep others happy. And as comedians' daughters, of course, happiness, in some ways was what would you say, over pronounced, like this need for people to be kept happy.
Mm,
And we also know that there was, he's not here to tell the story himself, but we know there was a lot of unresolved trauma in our dad's life, and this kind of like taking on the responsibility of making people happy, being the poster boy of happiness, essentially, making people happy, making people laugh, taking their troubles away, and wherever that came from. But this idea that happiness must be achieved through all, by any means necessary, and that the absence of happiness is a threat, also is a trap that we fall into. Because as humans, we're capable of a much wider um, expanse of emotions, and also emotions can coexist. Like happiness comes and goes. It's
mhm,
not necessarily a fixed state. It comes and goes, and you have moments of happiness, you know? And then there's moments of bleh, and there's moments then of despair. There's moments of all these things that come and go, and and it doesn't have to be like when we expand and develop our emotional maturity and our emotional intelligence and our resilience and our ability to process emotions and really see them as information, really, that of course comes along with some physiological changes in our body that can feel very unnerving.
mhm.
Then we are not going to feel the need so much to make sure that nobody really strays too far from happy in our company,
Yeah.
you know? And therefore, like the discomfort, like getting okay with discomfort, like standing there and recognizing that, like even getting in a lift. Getting in a lift and having to endure four or five stories of uncomfortable silence in the lift. I know that there's a part of me that jumps into the whole, like, class clown. Like, I want to crack a joke just to break the tension.
Yeah, but sometimes that's just fun though.
Well, I know that. I know that.
Mhm.
As you said at the very beginning, it's almost like it's teasing it out. And I can say to myself, am I doing this because I can't stand the
Yeah,
discomfort? Or am I doing this because my mischievous nature
right.
just like enjoys it?
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? Maybe that's a really good point. If anybody wants to become more aware of this, because I am by no means cured of people pleasing. I am somebody who is actively working and practicing ways to have healthier boundaries and trusting that I am enough as I am, and the people who really want to be around me when I am my authentic self will stay. And if I'm not as fun as, I am when I'm in full on people pleasing mode, well, then, those people are just going to have to step aside because my energy is more precious to me now than ever. And I want to manage it in a way that's healthy for me and my family. But maybe that's a really good tool is when you find yourself in a place where you are making a decision and you
Mhm.
are aware in your body that it is not a decision that is conducive to, your own needs and health, that there's a question that you ask. Am I doing this because I genuinely want to help this person and I have the energy reserved to do that? Or am I doing it because I'm hoping to get something out of it? Or I'm hoping to avoid something? Or I'm afraid of something?
So good. That is so bang on. Like I have a choice in this moment.
Yes.
I can choose how to show up in this. I can whip out my mischievous, like say something funny in the lift, or I can just stand there and let it be awkward. Like I
Yeah.
have a choice. I am not compelled anymore to take on that role at all times. And also, maybe this isn't uncomfortable for everybody in this lift. Maybe this is the only, you know, 50 seconds of silence Bridie over there has had all day. And I'm over here interrupting it with my stupid jokes, you
Well,
know?
but look at we didn't lick it off the rocks, Amanda. I mean, Dad
Mm,
was always the
yeah.
first to jump in to
Mm,
rescue a situation if he
mm,
felt that, it needed some sort of
yeah.
rescuing.
And it is a great skill set, I often think, because I know that being, having a lighter side to the personality is, it is a very efficient way of disarming people.
Yeah.
Which of course begs the question, like, do I feel like I'm up against a firing, squad half the time? But it can, of course, bringing lightness to a situation is a very valuable thing to say. But again, we can decide: am I going to be that person today, or am I just going to sit here and let myself rest? Because every time I take on that role, I'm taking on everything that comes with it.
Do you know that as soon as you just said the word rest, my whole body just took this breath?
Yeah.
Really and truly, that is what I'm saying about, in that 50 seconds in the lift, right? The lift slash elevator. Um, do I want this 50 seconds to just be quiet like everyone else is? Or am I going to use up that energy? And like every little piece of energy that we use up adds up, at the end of the day to the reason we feel so bloody exhausted when we could make a choice in that moment, to just exist
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
not jump in.
Yeah. Just exist, exactly.
Yeah,
um and be part of the fabric, you know
yeah.
um so let's circle back to answer your question of 15 minutes ago. Like, how do we move towards breaking free and reclaiming our power if people pleasing ultimately is at its root cause a battle of wills, and therefore a way of controlling in the absence of actually being empowered,
Mm,
or feeling that I don't have any power in this moment. Or if I do exert my power, I lose, someone else is going to dominate me with theirs. Anyway, first of all, it's to recognize your patterns, and I hope in the stories that we've told, which I suppose in the moment as we're telling them, feel a bit clumsy to me anyway, because we are kind of like scrambling through. We're not over here giving a very kind of like academic read on people pleasing. We're trying to humanize this in
yeah.
terms of how it's actually showing up in ways that maybe not obvious. Because loads of people be like, "Oh, I'm such a people pleaser," and what I like to say to them is, "Oh, you've just claimed that like as if it's a virtue."
Well, that's exactly how it is claimed often.
Yeah, yeah. Because there is but there is the social validation, but then you have to ask your question, well, who benefits?
Yeah.
Who benefits when I'm exerting all my energy? Not me. And it's not about you benefiting all the time. But by the way, this is actually a phenomenon in social studies. I think it's called sociotropic or sociotropy or something like that, people pleasing. And research has suggested that people who do not like who are compelled in this way with people pleasing patterns, like basically suppressing their own needs and truths
Yeah.
to keep the peace, are at a higher risk of depression and all the ways that depression manifests, anxiety, and also burnout.
Well, of course they are because they're not tending to their own needs.
Yeah. Yeah. So there will be a fall. Like there is a cost and it could take a lifetime to come around. That's why a lot of, when we get to midlife, that burnout really starts to show up. Okay, so recognize your patterns. Like journal. Do you journal? What is your way of documenting? Like, do you have any kind of practice where you check in with yourself at any point? Journaling, of course, is the one for me. Hearing myself, writing it down, noticing when it mightn't even be in the moment, but you
Mhm.
might, like, it could be Wednesday and you'd be like, I just feel like shit today and I don't really know why. And if you look back over your journal, you might discover that 10 days ago,
Yeah.
something's been gnawing at you this whole time. So journaling is a great way to recognize your patterns.
And Amanda,
But
can I put in for
yeah,
1 second? Can
yeah.
I just chime in here, right? For moms who might be listening, who, say, well, I don't have time for that. Who has time for journaling? I don't have time for journaling. It must be well for you not having kids because you have time to journal. As a mother myself, I have found a way to do this. And it is important enough for me to carve out the time for this. What I have done is I have a digital journal and it sends me an email every evening and I can write a word, a sentence, a paragraph, a couple of paragraphs, whatever I have time for. There's no excuse for me, as busy as I might be, juggling all that I'm juggling, to not be able to document one word about how my day went. And what's nice about the digital journal, and the one I use is called Dabble Me. What's nice about it is when it sends you that question of how did your day go or how are you feeling, it shows you what you wrote last week or last month or
Um,
last year.
wow.
So it's very easy to track a pattern. And
Mm.
it has been pivotal in my journey of, figuring out patterns for myself because you're right, everything is rooted in a pattern.
Yeah, yeah, and we have to. That's great advice for people, Mel. And I am so not a purist when it comes to journaling by any means necessary.
Yeah.
Get those patterns down on paper or digitally or however. This goes back to something else you said, body awareness. Like start listening to your body. Feeling tense, feeling drained, and of course these things are normalized. So you could feel tense and feel drained and just think, oh well, of course I am. Um, these are um, these are signs that we're not honoring our true needs. And just as a very quick aside here, I recently had a situation where I was about to people please somebody. I was in the process of pleasing somebody who made a request. It was a person who had taken a course from me, and now she wanted something else from me that wasn't on the table, but that she made a case for. And my answer was no, like if I was honest. But I was doing the whole, God, well, maybe I should just, sure, what's it going to cost me to blah, blah, blah. And I basically gaslit myself for 3 days about this. And
Yeah.
the more it went on, like this person sent several communications my way, and I could feel all of the activation in my body and the dread and the, oh no, I don't want to do this. But I still gaslit myself doing the whole like, she probably just hasn't, she probably just needs someone to listen to her. Sure, all of this stuff. And then I carried it for 3 days. And then I went after work one day, I went for the sauna that I go for like at least
Yeah.
once a week. And when I came out of that sauna, I felt so good that it reminded me, I was like, oh yeah, this is how I want to feel in my body, not bracing myself for some kind of impact.
Oh, yeah. That is the description of the podcast. Say that again.
Yeah.
Bracing yourself for impact. That's what it is. And think of what that does to your entire body. It
Mm.
takes a long time to recover from that.
Yeah. Yeah. So knowing that, like that snapped me out of it. I was doing the whole hokey pokey. I was one foot in, one foot out, didn't know what to do. Will I do it? Won't I do it? I don't want to, but I should really, because and especially because she was somebody who had paid to do my course, but she got everything, everything was delivered that was promised, and she just wanted more.
Yeah.
And I felt obliged to give that more. And then I was shocked back into my body by feeling incredible on the other side of my self-care. And then I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. Anyway, so that's that body awareness. So you really get into your body. And exactly what you said earlier, Mel, like learn to question yourselves. Like, am I doing this because I genuinely want to? Or am I
Yep.
doing this because I feel like I have to?
It's the whole idea of putting your own mask on before you help someone else on the plane.
Yeah.
Providing yourself with what you need, at which point then you may become more available to, offer, your help and kindness and generosity in ways that are not, people pleasing and depleting yourself, which is what,
Mm.
we're talking about.
Mm. And that you're not going to go off resenting the person that you apparently thought so much of to go out of your way to help. It's like we don't want to go away and just be like, I know I've done that. I've gone out my way for somebody and then walk away rolling my eyes at them. And I would like it's just like that. That is so confusing. Anyway, um, learning to say no. Like what we said at the beginning about self-preservation. Like, can we have the self-preservation? Like, how direct can we be? Can we just say no instead of earning it? Like, I can only say no once I have achieved a certain level of worthiness to say it. Practicing boundaries. That's a whole other episode. We can't even get into that right now, and we absolutely will. But the idea of what a boundary is, what a boundary isn't, the different natures of them, and how, you know, like being in authentic relationship. Oh, this is another part of people pleasing. You really need to up level your relationships. You really need to take a look around and be like, am I surrounding myself with people who can hold their own, who will not fall apart if I say no, who will not shame me if I say no, or guilt me, or do the whole, oh, I'm sad now. Like, can I trust somebody to
Yeah.
hold my no, to have their plan scuppered because am just not on board? And for them to say, you know what, like I'd prefer if you were there, but I understand if you're not, and actually believe them that they
Yes, and
actually
mean it.
mean it. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yes.
boundaries, we can't have boundaries with people who don't respect boundaries. Well, we can, but you have to honor your own boundaries. We'll get around to that in another day. So yeah, of course, that begs the question, how are you showing up in your relationships? Are you being your true self? Are you lying? Even if if it seems like a noble lie, to say like, well, I'm not having a great time, but I'm just kind of going through the motions for them. Like, what would it be like to opt out? What would it be like to say no, to let somebody down? So just to notice how you are showing up in your relationships. Are you being truthful, or are you modifying your behavior to manage somebody else's reaction? Embracing that honesty with yourself first and foremost. And I have
Mm.
an affirmation here. I honor my truth by showing up as my authentic self without fear or need for approval. Now, I just would have to correct that there a little bit, because a life without fear, we do it even if we have fear. And we
Right.
do it in acknowledgement that, oh, look at me expressing a need for approval. And instead of outsourcing that need, turning back in towards ourselves. So it's not that you're going in without fear or need for approval. You may be going in with fear, and that's okay. You may actually realize, oh, look at me in the middle of something here that's actually a need for approval. And I'm outsourcing that need right now. So I am using other people as strategies to meet needs
Mhm.
that are really my own business to meet. And so, how can you offer yourself the
Yeah.
approval or the assurance or the safety or the love, whatever it is that you're needing? Your needs are not wrong. Fear is not wrong. And okayness is not the absence of fear, and it's not the absence of need, you know?
Love that.
Yeah. And know that one of the things that I say to my clients all the time and my students is that when we tend to our own well-being, it is not just something we do for ourselves, it's something that benefits others. You know, your
Mhm.
healing is a gift, your well-being is a gift. And if you don't believe me, or if you don't, if some part of you is like, oh, okay, think about a person in your life over the years that had they taken better care of themselves would have made a much more valuable contribution to your life. Think about the person whose lack of self-care had a negative impact on your life. And think about how their well-being, them tending to their well-being would have been a gift to you.
I
And
love
and
that.
remember that you are that person in someone else's life. So, anything else you'd like to say there, Mel?
It is just once again, we're touching on one of those taboo subjects that we really don't talk a lot about, or we at least don't, unlayer it the way that we have today. Just to take that, like the biggest takeaway for me is to remind people not to equate worthiness to just productivity in general, but particularly around neglecting your own needs to please other people so that they will write a lead role for you in the performance, the play that they're writing in their own world. I think just, that reminder to people that, it's not worth it. Um, and that we need to put our own masks on first before we can even consider the needs of others.
Yeah, yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. Um, I guess for me, the big lesson recently was that realization I had getting out of the sauna in that like the ways that although I can be quite confrontational and appear to be somebody who doesn't do people pleasing, where it does show up for me is around, areas such as body image. Like I've been a pleaser to diet culture my entire life, a
Mhm.
conformer, or a conformist, I should say, to diet culture. Also, like the whole like power structure of I turn to jelly like if around quote unquote powerful men or people who are paying me for a service, regardless of whether they get what they were promised. I still, if they look for more, I instantly have jelly legs about that. So they are the boundaries that say that, and the areas that I'm still working on in terms of the pressure to conform, the pressure to oblige societal, I guess, societal expectations that I should be a certain way,
Hmm.
and that I just, you know, just amn't, or if I am, I'm pretty miserable. I don't
Yeah.
enjoy it. So yeah, just keep. That's my thing is keep doing the saunas, Amanda, and reminding yourself what it feels like to feel good in your body, so that every time it doesn't feel like that, I can at least be onto it. That I'm going wrong. I'm going against my compass here somehow.
Yeah. And just have a practice, have a small
Mm,
practice.
hmm
Like you said, whether it's journaling, take that sauna, whatever it is, it's important. We need to make time for it.
Yeah. All right. So well, we'll wrap it up, and I guess we'll chat next week. We are on Substack, and when you subscribe to Substack, it's a free subscription. And it just lands our podcasts into your inbox without you having to go looking for them. So it's just a very easy way to do that. And do I know what the Substack address is? It'll be in the show notes anyway. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, click on the description and there will be links there that will bring you straight to the Substack. And of course, we will put in there as well, whatever it was that you mentioned, that digital journal, we'll put all of that in there too.
Sounds good. I
Okay,
enjoyed our conversation and we look forward to coming back with more next week.
cool. See y'all later.
Bye, Amanda.
Bye.